Hello, hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas by Cassandra Clare. I hope everyone's Halloween was exceptionally good. I had a really nice, quiet time. So, now that spooky season is over, as we go into November here, I will be able to do some catching up in this particular fan fiction. So, unfortunately, I can't remember if there's any disclaimers for this particular chapter, so I'm just going to say that all trigger warnings apply here, just in case. So, if you're not in the mood for anything like that, now would be a good time to sit this one out. But without further ado, let's just get right into it. Chapter 3: Darkness and Flood. The worst part of being in the hospital wing, Ginny soon determined, was the flood of people who came along to cheer you up. It wasn't bad seeing Hermione, Harry, and Ron, but when the whole Gryffindor team descended upon her at once, it gave her a bit of a headache. And Charlie's fretting over her made her nervous. She felt perfectly fine, and wished Madame Pomfrey would let her out of the infirmary, but she insisted on keeping her there for observation. Doubtless, Ginny assumed, because she was worried about head trauma. Lavender and Parvati came to visit her on the second day she was in the hospital wing. Ginny pretended to be partly asleep when they giggled about gossip. Eloise Midgen had broken up with Justin Finch-Fletchley, declaring him to be not enthusiastic enough about their relationship. Fashion. Pansy Parkinson had showed up to History of Magic class wearing very dodgy-looking barrettes. And the pub crawl. Parvati was going with Dean Thomas, Lavender with Mark Knott. "But Mark's a Slytherin," Parvati had protested. Lavender was unmoved. "So what? Being anti-Slytherin is so last year, Parvati." "Unless you're Seamus," said Parvati and giggled. At that, Ginny forgot to be asleep and opened her eyes enough to say, "What do you mean?" Parvati was only too happy to explain. "When you fell off your broom, Seamus practically killed Draco Malfoy to keep him from getting anywhere near you. It was so cute." Dumbfounded, Ginny stared. "Why would he?" Lavender shook her head. "I don't know. We couldn't hear any of it, you know. We just saw everyone sort of go bolting towards you, and then Seamus stepped in front of Malfoy and blocked him long enough for Harry to come up and toss him off the pitch." "Harry tossed Malfoy off the pitch?" "I think so," said Parvati, looking thoughtful. "He just sort of grabbed him by the wrist, and then Draco stared at him for a minute before bolting off like a wild animal. Like I said, we were far away, so it was a bit hard to tell what was really happening." Not knowing how else to react, Ginny opened her mouth to tell them both that she was tired, and perhaps they should continue this conversation another time. But it was too late. Lavender and Parvati had launched into their favorite game, a repellent exercise entitled "What Would You Rather?", which involved nominating various pairs of Hogwarts boys and determining which one you would rather sleep with. "Terry Boot or Ernie Macmillan?" Parvati demanded of her friend. "Terry," said Lavender. "Draco Malfoy or Malcolm Baddock?" Lavender thought for a moment, then giggled. "Draco Malfoy." "Justin Finch-Fletchley or Ron Weasley?" "Ron." "Harry or Ron?" Still Ron, I think." Ginny put a pillow over her face, refusing to remove it until Lavender and Parvati finally went away. Much later, Ginny was napping off and on when she heard a voice calling out to her from behind the curtain drawn around her bed. "Hey, Ginny, you awake?" Yes, she replied lazily. You can come in. The curtain was drawn aside, and Ginny saw without much surprise that her visitor was Seamus Finnegan. He took a few halting steps into the room, his book bag slung over his shoulder. Evidently he had come directly from class. He paused at the foot of her bed, looking uncomfortable. Hey there, Seamus, she said kindly, confused by his expression. In response, Seamus twisted the ends of his bag in between his fingers, looking even more ill at ease. Can I talk to you for a second? All right, she said, feeling suddenly apprehensive. It's about Malfoy, he blurted without the slightest pretense at build-up. What about Malfoy? Ginny asked, perplexed. What's between you two? There's nothing between us, Ginny said, which was true enough, but she didn't want to go into the details of the matter. It wasn't really Seamus's business. Well, what's going on then? He pressed. What are you talking about? She asked, feeling more bewildered by the second. Seamus smiled at her, but his eyes were serious. After you fell off your broom, Malfoy ran to your side for no apparent reason, and when I confronted him and told him to stay the hell away from you, he pretty much threatened to break every bone in my body if I tried to stop him. Ginny blinked at him, and he shifted, clearly uncomfortable again. Look, I know his mom is marrying Sirius, he went on hastily, so maybe Harry feels like they have to get along now. But if you ask me, Malfoy isn't trustworthy, and he isn't nice. He's one of those people who will smile and stab you in the back. I don't understand why you're telling me this, she said, stunned. Did Malfoy tell you there was something going on with us? No, but his attitude suggested that you don't mean nothing to him. Ginny felt her eyebrows shoot up to her hairline. Oh, she said, at a loss for what else to say. Seamus shook his head. You must think I'm stupid. Not stupid, she said with perfect candor. Look, Seamus, if you think I'm not being fair to you, I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have agreed to hang out with you the night of the pub crawl. Seamus looked at her for a moment in surprise, and then smiled. His eyes were not precisely blue, but rather had a green cast. Relax, he said. It's not like we're getting married. I just wanted to... Warn me? Seamus shrugged. All right, yes. Look, I just want to hang out with you on the pub crawl night. I don't need to hear any more about you and Malfoy, if there ever was a you and Malfoy. Thanks for that, said Ginny. As he moved to go, a thought occurred to her. That kiss on the cheek. Seamus, she said suddenly. He paused in the act of pulling back the curtain. Yes? Were you here the other night? She asked. Did you visit me? He shook his head, looking honestly confused by the question. No, I didn't. Why? Oh, said Ginny, sinking back against the pillows as a flood of guilty relief washed through her. No reason. Seamus asked to hang out with you the night of the pub crawl? That's wonderful! Hermione exclaimed, beaming at Ginny, who was forking scrambled eggs and toast off her plate. It was her first day out of the infirmary, and while she felt perfectly fine, a strange sort of uneasiness had settled on her that was hard to shake off. Keep your voice down, Hermione, Ginny retorted, although fortunately Seamus was seated at the opposite end of the Gryffindor table and couldn't possibly overhear. Did you say you would? Asked Ron, who was pushing a piece of bread around his plate with his spoon. Apparently he wasn't very hungry either. Of course she said yes, said Hermione quickly. Seamus is lovely, good-looking, nice, talented, and so funny. Ron looked taken aback. Good grief, Hermione. Maybe you should go to the pub crawl with him. Hermione blushed. I just meant... I said yes, said Ginny abruptly. Great! Hermione flashed her a wide smile. That's so lovely for you, Gin. Thanks, said Ginny, unable to shake the feeling that Hermione was just a bit too happy for her. Hey, all. Ginny looked up and saw Harry taking the empty place between Ron and Hermione that they had saved for him. He looked a little tired, but on the whole better than he'd been looking lately. Seamus is planning on skipping the pub crawl to spend the evening with Ginny, Hermione told him cheerfully as he sat down and picked up his fork. Great. Harry poked uninterestedly at a sausage, then glanced up at Hermione. That's a good thing, right? You're not telling me this because I'm supposed to be indignant or something? Hermione shook her head. No, it's a good thing. It's too bad he won't be at the pub crawl, though, said Ron, reaching for the cream jug and pouring a liberal amount onto his porridge. When he glanced up, his expression was thoughtful. Hey, Harry, you've got a study period now, don't you? Harry nodded. Want to come to Hogsmeade with me? Ron asked. I've got to go down to the factory to see George and Fred. Last-minute paperwork before the crawl. He tapped his pocket, from which a sheaf of parchment extruded. Harry shrugged. Sure, why not? Can you make it back in time for Care of Magical Creatures? Hermione asked worriedly. If I don't, I don't, said Harry without much interest. But Charlie said he had something special for us. Then you can tell me all about it later, said Harry with finality. Hermione opened her mouth to say something, but Ginny decided that an intervention was in order. Everyone still in love with Charlie? She asked hastily. Hermione dragged her eyes away from Harry. He's a really good teacher, she said. He knows everything. Last week he talked about dairy crawls for 2 straight hours. Nobody but you could think that was sexy, Hermione, said Ron. I didn't say it was sexy, said Hermione indignantly, and then she and Ron were off and running, bickering as was their habit. Harry sat quietly between them, looking across the room. A sense of something familiar tugged at the back of Ginny's mind as she looked at him, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't place the memory. Looking at his haunted expression and the set of his shoulders, she couldn't help thinking that it was probably for the best. Hurry up, Harry! Spring is approaching. Let's go, shall we? I did tell George we'd be there before noon. All right, said Harry, glancing up from his fixed perusal of an icicle clinging to a tree branch. His skin was scarlet with cold along his cheekbones, and so were his hands. He had not bothered to wear gloves. He sighed and resumed walking. It was a gorgeous December day, the sky a hollowed blue bowl traced with faint white clouds. The path through the trees that led to Hogsmeade was worn to a glassy shimmer, and the bare tree branches stood out overhead like black lacework against the sky. Given the brightness and the beauty of the weather, Harry's gloomy mood seemed like even more of a blot on the landscape. Ron waited patiently for Harry to catch up to him. Really, Potter, he drawled in his best Draco imitation. If I'd known you were going to drag along like a turtle with heavy shopping, I wouldn't have invited you in the first place. Ha ha, very amusing. Harry had now caught up to Ron, who started off again, Harry beside him. He doesn't always sound like that. Ron looked at him witheringly. Oh, all right, he does. Sounds weird coming from you, though. Harry paused, thoughtfully. Nastier. You're just used to my normal radiant personality. Probably, said Harry, and glanced sideways at Ron. Speaking of which, are you going with anyone to the pub crawl? Ron nearly tripped over a fallen tree branch. No, actually. Why not? Asked Harry curiously. Ron bit back the response that he was shocked Harry had snapped out of his dirge-like mental state enough to notice whether he had a date or not. It's going to be like work for me, you know, being head boy and all, keeping an eye on everyone. It wouldn't be fun for a girl. If you say so. You asked Hermione yet? Harry looked taken aback. Well, no. I just assumed. Why do you ask? Alarm was creeping into his voice. She didn't say she wanted to go with anyone else, did she? Now, you idiot! It's just, well, you're not going to win any points by not asking. Nobody likes to be taken for granted. Hermione especially. Harry opened his mouth to speak, then paused, looking ahead of them. Ron followed his gaze and saw Pansy Parkinson coming over the small rise that led up from Hogsmeade. She was carrying a sheaf of parchments in her hands, and smirked when she saw them. "Hello, Weasley," she said. "Shouldn't you be in care of magical creatures, Potter?" Ron regarded her irritably. "What are you up to, Pansy?" "Got permission to come down to Hogsmeade and distribute the leaflets about the pub crawl," she said in a superior tone. "What are you up to?" "We're scathing," said Harry crossly. "Do run back and tell everyone all about it." "As if I would anyway," said Pansy, looking indignant. "Of course you would, if you thought it would do you the blindest bit of good," said Harry, in a tone that surprised Ron with its harshness. "Goodbye, Pansy." And he turned and stalked off, so that Ron was forced to spin round and follow him. "Go, Harry," he said, catching up. "What was all that?" "I don't like her," said Harry, his mouth set in a hard, straight line. "She makes my skin crawl." Ron snorted. "You're the one who's all up with Slytherins, not me." Harry continued to stalk, kicking up lace-like sprays of snow with his boots. "Yeah, right. Whatever. I don't expect you to understand." "Harry!" Ron began, exasperated, but he could tell from the tense set of Harry's back that there was no point pursuing the matter. Instead, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. Pansy was still standing there in the middle of the snowy trail, looking back at them, and for a moment he saw a flash of what looked like utter malice cross her face. And she turned and started back down the path, and was soon lost among the trees. Having nearly fallen asleep in History of Magic, Draco was almost late to Care of Magical Creatures. The other students were already there, although Charlie had not yet arrived. As he approached the snowy field where they were meeting, he saw Hermione, looking very much alone, gazing off towards the Forbidden Forest with a distracted expression. Without Harry or Ron bookending her, she looked smaller than she usually did, and more fragile. It was odd that they weren't there yet, as class had already started. Walking past Hermione towards the members of his house, Draco paused, then knelt down in front of her and pretended to tie his shoe. Out of the corner of his mouth he hissed, "Where's Harry? And Weasley, for that matter?" Hermione jumped slightly, then busied herself tucking a curl of hair behind her ear. "They went to Hogsmeade with some pub crawl paperwork. Dumbledore gave Ron a pass." "But not Harry?" "I don't think so." "So he's just skeeving, then?" Hermione looked unhappy. Draco abandoned the pretense of tying his shoe, stood up, and went to stand with the rest of the Slytherins. Blaise caught at his hand and gave it a quick squeeze of welcome as he joined the group. Then she looked beyond him, and her green eyes went very wide. "Look," she said, and Draco turned to see what she was looking at, and saw Charlie coming down the path towards them, swathed in a dark winter cloak. Behind him was a large trolley on wheels, which he was pulling and was draped with a heavy tarpaulin covering. From beneath the fabric, thick white steam was rising. I wonder what he's got in there, said Malcolm, interested. I think I know, said Draco with certainty. Only one thing made Charlie light up like that. It's got to be dragons, said Charlie loudly, stopping in between the groups of students and letting go of his trolley, which sat and steamed beside him. Are the most fascinating magical creatures in existence. The whole class nodded. Everyone loved Charlie. Even the frosty Slytherins had melted a little under his relentlessly outgoing charm. If he said that trolls were fascinating conversationalists and Cornish pixies made good study partners, they would have nodded along with him. I've been working with dragons for 6 years, Charlie went on equably, and there is no animal more misunderstood in the wizarding world. The one I've got here under this covering is only 1 week old. Now, he glanced around the class, and Draco saw his eyebrows draw together as he registered Harry's absence. Who here wants to see a real live baby dragon? The class chorused their eagerness. With a cheerful grin, Charlie picked up 2 objects from off the top of the trolley. Thick fireproof gloves, and stripped off the heavy cloak he was wearing to reveal his battered jacket and trousers of black dragonhide leather. A happy little gasp escaped several female members of the class, which Charlie apparently didn't notice, or if he did, he was doing an excellent job of pretending to be oblivious. Ooh, said Blaise under her breath. This is going to be the best class ever. Draco snorted with laughter. Blaise gave him a slow-eyed look. You don't mind if I stare at Charlie, do you? Draco was nonchalant. Not at all. Gawk away. This class is really a bit of an accident, Charlie went on cheerfully, pulling on his leather gloves and reaching to undo the big buckles that held the tarp down over the open-top trolley. I've had custody of a dragon egg this year. It wasn't meant to hatch till the holidays, but these things are notoriously unpredictable. Anyway, it hatched last Tuesday, quite unexpectedly, and the hatchling is now only ready to face the outside world. The last buckle undone, Charlie drew the tarp away, and the class gasped again. Inside the open-top trolley was a large steel cage, and inside it, curled into a ball and fast asleep, was a baby dragon. It was dark green in color, with deep gold horn nubs protruding from its small head. Charlie looked down at it with an unmistakably fond expression, then back up at the class. Can anyone tell me what type of dragon this is? Hermione's hand went up. Romanian Longhorn, she said, in her usual clear and certain voice, but Draco could tell, without being able to explain how, that something was bothering her. She looked very nearly woeful as she let her hand fall back to her side. Right, said Charlie. And what does it eat? Hermione's hand went up again, but this time Charlie called on Neville, who ventured to guess that Longhorns ate goats and cattle, and added that its horns were valued as potion ingredients. Charlie awarded 5 points to Gryffindor. The fact that he had been correct surprised Draco, who found Neville completely useless most of the time, although when he had once shared this thought with Harry, the other boy had nearly taken his head off in response. "Ah, bother," Charlie said, his voice snapping Draco out of his revere. He was kneeling down next to the trolley now, an annoyed expression on his face. "I've forgotten the dragon food. Can I have 2 students volunteer to race back to my office and get it? It's in a blue bucket above my desk. Right then, Granger and Malfoy." Draco tensed in surprise. He hadn't even had his hand up. Next to him, Blaise was radiating fury. Without looking at her, he detached himself from the rest of the Slytherins, sauntered over towards Charlie, and accepted a large gold key from his outstretched hand. "Second door down from Snape's, and hurry," Charlie said as Hermione came trailing up, looking very unhappy indeed. "I'd rather the dragon not wake up hungry. He tends to yell." Draco nodded at Charlie, tucked the key into his pocket, and set off towards the castle. He could sense Hermione beside him, her small, booted feet crunching on the hard-packed snow. No sooner were they out of earshot of the class than she announced without preamble, "Draco, I want to talk to you about something." "Great, but I've already have a date for the pub crawl." "Ha ha," said Hermione. "Very funny, although not unrelated to what I wanted to talk to you about." "Which is?" Hermione took a deep breath. "Seamus is skipping the pub crawl to spend the evening with Ginny," she said. Draco stopped dead in his tracks. For a moment he was very conscious of the cold air around him, seeping through the soles of his shoes, the painfully bright winter sky. Then he shrugged. "That's nice for her." Hermione expelled a breath. "Right. Once more, with less feeling." "I mean it. It's nice for her." Draco started walking again, and Hermione fell into step with him. They were nearly at the side doors of the castle now. "Ginny and I," he said, "we're not a thing. We never were. I have a girlfriend." Hermione was silent, as if waiting for him to continue. He didn't. They reached the castle doors and went inside, where the warm air felt like a welcoming touch. As the doors shut behind them, Hermione shook her head. "All right, then. Accept it as fate if you want to." Draco laughed, without real humor. "My father used to say that fate is what you call it when you don't know the name of the person screwing you over." "Nobody's screwing you over, Draco." "How are things with Harry?" he asked abruptly. Hermione colored. He was aware that the abruptness of the question was slightly cruel, but he had no interest in continuing the conversation about Ginny and Seamus. He had shoved it to the back of his mind to process later. "Not great," she said. Draco suddenly realized he didn't want to be having this conversation either. They were walking along the long corridor now, passing other students, some of whom gave them curious looks. Hermione pitched her voice low. "He still seems miserable. The other night he was up late talking to Sirius, and he wouldn't tell me what they talked about. And now he's skipping class, which isn't the end of the world, but isn't like him either." They were at the door to Charlie's office now, and Hermione looked at Draco as he slid the key into the lock. "You think he seems depressed too, don't you?" "Well, he has been wearing a lot of black lately." Draco pushed the door open and went in. Hermione followed. "Either it's the whole warrior slated for the coming apocalypse thing, kind of a downer that, or his eyesight's gotten worse and he's just really worried about matching." "Don't," said Hermione sharply. "You know I have no sense of humor about Harry, or apocalypses." "I think it just goes to show what sort of life we lead that we can even consider using apocalypse in the plural." Hermione did smile then. "Life's been bad lately, hasn't it? I'm sorry, Draco. I know it has for you too." Draco didn't reply. He was looking around with curiosity. Since Charlie was a junior member of the faculty, his office was small, but it was decorated in such a homey fashion that that didn't matter. Pictures of the Weasley clan, waving and smiling, were stuck to every available space. The small, battered desks were covered with bolts of colorful Romanian cloth, and a beautiful rainbow-hued dragon scale decorated the wall near the door. On another wall was a wood-framed mirror that Draco recognized. It had hung in Charlie's tent back at the dragon camp. On the small table by the desk were stacked a number of books with gilt-encrusted spines. Fantastic Beasts, of course, the Dragon Hunter's Handbook, Dragon Tales, a compendium, and a colorful cloth-bound novel entitled A Dream of Dragons. Draco turned around. While he had been scanning the room, Hermione had located the bucket, high on a shelf above Charlie's desk. He watched her as she cast about for something to climb up on. "Hermione," he said, his voice thoughtful, "what do you know about oniromantics?"
"Romantic waltz?"
"Oniromantics," he corrected her gently.
"Oh, wizards who can travel in dreams."
"Right."
"Well, I know it takes a lot of study and preparation,"
said Hermione, seizing hold of a tall stool and dragging it across the room.
"I know there's a bunch of Aura's Guild that deals with it. And I know if you don't do it properly, you can splinter your psychic self."
"That sounds nasty."
"It is, since you're never the same afterward," she said grimly, climbing up on the stool. "Why do you ask?"
"I've been having dreams," he began, and Hermione was so surprised she almost overbalanced and fell into him, but steadied herself. "Here, take my hand," Draco said, coming to stand beside her, and she took it gratefully, reaching for the bucket with her other hand.
"Not the kind you used to have?" she asked.
"No," he said, and tried very hard not to notice that he was now at eye level with her slender calves. "Not about any kind of past life, not that kind of thing. This is in real time. These events that are actually happening while I'm seeing them. I'm sure of that now." He looked up. "It's like I've opened a window into a place I've never been. But it's a real place, Hermione."
"Do you recognize the place?"
she asked, and handed the bucket down to him. He set it carefully on the desk and shook his head. "No, but I could describe it to you in detail. Maybe we could find some reference to it in the Grand Grimoire, or the Lexicon of Unpleasant Locations, or—" Hermione smiled at him.
"I know the restricted section as well as you do, Draco," she said. "Well, perhaps not quite as well, but well enough. If you give me a good enough description of what you saw, we can go from there. Also, I want to know if you just fall asleep and find yourself in this place, or do you have to will your mind there? And if there are people in your dreams, can they see you or not? I want to know if you're dream walking or having real visions."
He nodded, his expression amused. "All right," he said. Hermione continued to smile. Then her eyes went to the bucket, and her nose wrinkled in disgust.
"Ugh,"
she said with feeling.
"There's something all squashy in there."
"Well, what do you think tame dragons ate?" Draco replied lightly.
"Dragon kibble?"
suggested Hermione, who was still using his hand to balance herself. "I don't know what kibble is, but I can't imagine any dragon worth his salt wanting to live on it. That's why they're always devouring pretty young virgins in fairy tales, not bowls of salad. In fact, if I were you, I'd just stand well away from the dragons, no matter what Charlie says." And Draco trailed off, realizing that Hermione was giving him a peculiar look. "Not," he added hastily, "that you're a virgin." Her eyebrows went up even higher. "And not that you aren't one, either," he said, even more hastily, realizing that he had never given this aspect of her relationship with Harry a thought. "And not that I would know. I mean, how would I know? Because Harry hasn't said anything about you to me. I mean, not that he doesn't talk about you. He talks about you all the time." Draco realized that he was raving, and, with an effort, stopped the flow of speech. Hermione was staring at him in what he could only interpret as total fury. "I don't suppose," he said finally, "that if I agreed to eat whatever was in that bucket, you would forget everything I just said." For a moment, Hermione was silent. Then, to his surprise, she burst out into peals of laughter. She laughed so hard she nearly overbalanced and tumbled off the stool. Stumbling, she slid forward, and he reached up and caught her by the waist as she fell and set her down on her feet, still laughing. "Oh," she said, her face turned up to his. Look on your face! Would you really have eaten what was in that bucket? I don't know, Draco said. He was having some trouble keeping his mind on matters at hand. He wasn't sure Hermione realized how close to him she was standing. He had a feeling that if Harry came in at that moment, he'd be facing a fencing match that wasn't just for practice. Damn, he thought fiercely. Damn, damn, damn. Probably, if you wanted me to. Her eyes went suddenly wide and luminous, and her mouth curved up into a smile, and she looked on the verge of speaking, then stopped. Sudden color flooded her face, as if she had been dropped in boiling water. Hastily, she stepped away from him. It's getting late, she said quickly, and reached for the bucket on the desk with a trembling hand. When she had seized it, she nearly threw herself towards the door. We'd better go. Charlie will be wondering where we are, she said breathlessly, and hurried out into the corridor. Draco stood and looked after her, until something else caught his attention. Tucked into the frame of the mirror near the door was a photo of Ginny in a white sundress, her hair tied back, smiling and blowing kisses. He looked at it, then hastily away, back at the doorway through which Hermione had just disappeared. How had life managed to get so complicated in such a short time? He wondered. However it had happened, he couldn't help but feel that it showed every sign of not working out well for him. Hey Ron, you look good. Harry, you look like a wet weekend. What's wrong? Upset about the game yesterday? Speaking of which, Fred pitched his voice low. How's Ginny? She's fine. Up and around, sassy and obnoxious, showing no respect for her elders, as usual, said Ron, sinking into one of the huge lime-green, sweet-shaped chairs that decorated George and Fred's office. Beyond the huge glass window set into the wall, they could see down to the floor of the Wheezy's factory. Huge industrial-sized steel cauldrons bubbled and smoked with exotic brews. Amalex as tall as a full-grown wizard contained dried and flattened potion ingredients, and a pool in the floor held a whirl of melted chocolate. The ceiling, like the ceiling of the Great Hall, was enchanted to look like the sky, but unlike the ceiling in the Great Hall, this one reflected a sky unlike the one outside. Right now it looked like desert sky, vast and blue, touched with dark gold clouds. Harry suspected it was probably the sky over Egypt, where Bill was. It certainly wasn't the sky over Newcastle, where Percy was. New shipment from Slug & Jiggers, George announced cheerfully, staggering into the office under the weight of a large carton. He dropped it at Fred's feet and rubbed his sweaty face with his shirt. Hey, kids, he said, nodding at Ron and Harry, both of whom glowered at being called kids. The twins were, after all, only 19. What brings you here? Paperwork, said Ron, tossing his roll of parchment to George, who caught it and perched on the edge of the desk to read the contracts. Looks fine, he said. I can sign this, although you could have filed these over, you know. I wanted to look at the factory space, said Ron, getting to his feet and coming to stand by Harry at the window. We thought we would wind up the crawl here, and I just wanted to make sure the place was big enough. And sturdy enough. Fred and George, having been through their own pub crawl, grinned. Look around all you want, said Fred. In fact, I was just about to take this shipment of Benson and Hex's exploding cigarettes down to the floor. Do you two want to come? Ron nodded, but Harry, feeling weary, shook his head. I'll stay here. Fred looked at him, his blue eyes kind. You feeling all right, Harry? It was Ron who answered for him. He's just upset because of our history of magic assignment. We each have to interview one person who was involved in the downfall of you-know-who, and Harry got Snape. Harry looked at Ron in surprise. The lie was neatly done, and unusual for Ron, who wasn't very good at that sort of thing on a normal day. He supposed that Ron was simply trying to save him from further questioning. It was hard to tell, since Ron would not look at him. Fred looked mildly perturbed. "Sorry to hear that, Harry," he said. "Well, if you find out that the refusal to wash his hair had something to do with fighting evil, or it's just laziness, let me know." Fred and Ron left, carrying the carton between them. This left Harry alone with George, who was sitting on the desk. "I thought you didn't mind Snape so much anymore," said George curiously. "After all, he was at your birthday party, and his rendition of Heroes was masterful." Harry shrugged. "I don't mind him so much anymore." "So, what is bothering you then?" "Nothing," said Harry, and looked at his feet. "If Mum saw you like this, she'd throw wobbly," said George. "I've half a mind to tell her, too." "I have parents now," said Harry, stung. "I have Sirius." "Sirius spent 12 years in Azkaban. He might not be quite as quick to pick up on the fact that you look thin and haggard." "Sirius already gave me a telling off about my appearance," Harry ground out. All right, said George, taken aback. "Never mind. You look fabulous. Blooming. I hear under-eye circles are in for spring." "Thanks." Harry was again having trouble paying attention to George. He had been pondering all day how he might get to his parents' graves. "Don't mention it, mate," said George genially, then snapped his fingers. "I've got it. It's girl trouble, then. Hermione, maybe." But before he could continue, Jana, his petite brown-haired girlfriend, put her head round the door, a clipboard in her hand.
"There's an owl for you, George, and he won't go away unless I pay him. Have you got any sickles?"
George nodded at Harry and hopped off the desk. "Be right back," he said, scurrying past Jana's clipboard and out into the hall, Jana behind him. Harry looked after them, then leaned against the wall, happy to be left alone again. He did not want to be questioned about Hermione. He knew that he hadn't been very nice to Fred, or George either, or Ron for that matter. Not lately. And somewhere in the back of his mind he knew that the way he was behaving towards Hermione was, if not despicable, certainly not admirable. He wanted to be able to help it, but somehow he could not. More and more he found himself focused on exactly one thing, and more the trappings and distractions of ordinary life were falling away, like layers of skin being shed. If he were to do what he needed to do, he could not be distracted or turned aside by selfish concerns. He could not worry about other people or fear their reactions to what he wanted. There could only be hatred and the need for vengeance. He turned to look out the factory window and stood there silently, his gaze on the false blue sky of another country. In his mind's eye, he could see Hermione and Draco walking together, and though he didn't want to be, he was jealous. It was not in his nature to be jealous, but something in the back of his mind told him that if he kept pushing her away, she would run straight into the other boy's arms. The idea that she could love anyone else but him chilled him to the core, because he was quite sure that he could not. This was why he had not wanted to be with her in the first place. He was too damaged, and his affections, once given, could not be broken and remade. He heard Hermione's voice in his head. "For years I have wondered if you were the one for me," she had said, "and now I know you aren't." She hadn't meant it, he told himself. She had been angry and had not meant it. But what if someday she came to a place where she did mean it? If she knew what was being enacted inside him even now, then she would mean it. And what would happen then? When he was a child, those he had most loved had died and left him. If he was left again, he was afraid it might kill him. Unless he left her first. Seamus Finnegan sat at one of the long oak tables at the back of the library, reading a copy of Quidditch Illustrated, and was in the middle of turning a page when a shadow fell across the table, and he glanced up and saw Draco Malfoy standing over him. He bit back a surprised exclamation and eyed the other boy warily. The last time he'd seen Malfoy had been on the Quidditch pitch, and Draco, white-faced and furious, had looked like nothing on earth. Now he was composed and even smiling, his arms crossed over his expensive-looking cashmere sweater. "Finnegan," he said, "I wanted a word with you." Seamus tipped his chair back, trying for an air of casual disinterest. It wasn't easy. There was something alarming about the other boy's cold composure and the set line of his mouth. Not that he could do anything here, but what would Seamus do if Malfoy challenged him to a duel later on? He couldn't beat him, not at magic, although he suspected that if it came to fisticuffs, he could quite successfully damage the other boy's perfect features, if temporarily. "Yeah," he said. "What is it?" "I heard you're skeeving off the pub crawl to spend the evening with Ginny Weasley," said Malfoy calmly. Seamus was momentarily speechless. "So what if I am?" he said finally. "How is that your business?" Instead of answering his question, Draco merely leaned forward until his face was inches from Seamus's. "I just wanted to let you know that if you hurt her, I will beat you to death with a shovel. Got that?" Seamus just stared. "And if you tell anyone what I just said, I will still beat you to death with a shovel. Do you understand me?" Seamus found his voice, although it was fainter than usual. "A shovel? That's right. A vague disclaimer is nobody's friend. Keep it in mind," he said shortly, stepped back, and walked away from Seamus without looking back. Hermione decided to skip supper in favor of studying that evening, and ensconced herself in a corner of the common room, surrounded by pillows and books. Harry gave her an absent-minded wave on his way down to the Great Hall, which caused her to fantasize about throwing her copy of Dreams, Fantasy or Memory, an Oniromantic's Guide, at him. It was Ron who paused on his way down to the Great Hall to come over to see what she was doing. "Studying? Now? Aren't you hungry?" She shook her head. "No. Hand me that green book, will you?" Ron handed her a copy of a runic alphabet that she had special ordered from Flourish and Blots. "Don't you think it's about time you talked to Harry about the two of you?" Hermione sighed. "I've tried talking, and so far it hasn't worked." Ron shook his head. "You have got to resolve all this. I can't take much more of Misery Boy. Better to just—" "I don't think he's miserable about me," Hermione said softly. "It's something else. That's why I'm worried." Ron shook his head again, then bent down and peered at the parchment she had folded into the pages of her book. It was covered with strange symbols and odd scribblings. "Now what are you up to?" He laughed. "Just trying to translate some runes," said Hermione, feeling despairing. "I can't find any key for these, though. They're not Etruscan, they're not Egyptian." "I think they're Norwegian," said Ron. Hermione sat up straight. "Really?" "Yes," said Ron somberly. "In fact, I'm pretty sure this translates as, 'Are you happy to see me, or is that a longboat in your pocket?'" Hermione punched him in the arm, making him yelp. "I hate you. Give me my homework back." "Forget it." Ron held the parchment over his head, and mayhem might have well ensued had Ginny not appeared in the common room, looked at them, and snorted with laughter. "Would the head girl and boy like to stop hitting each other long enough to get dinner?" she said at length. Hermione took her parchment back and stuck her tongue out at Ron. "Go on. she said, and he hopped up obediently and went to join his sister. She watched them a little wistfully as they headed down the stairs together, but the thought of another long meal wherein Harry said nothing to her was more than she could deal with. Sinking back sadly amongst the cushions, she returned to her books. She had just flipped over her runic alphabet when a sound made her pause. A muffled noise. The sound of someone crying? Getting to her feet, she drew her plaid blanket around herself and went to investigate. The sound was coming from the boys' dormitory, and she paused before going in. But she was head girl after all, and the students' welfare was her concern. The door swung wide and she went in, blinking for a moment in the dim light before her eyes adjusted. She saw Neville sitting on the floor by his bed, an open chocolate frog box in his lap. "Neville?" she said, her voice worried. "Are you all right?" Neville brought his hands down from his face and looked up at her. "Oh, Hermione," he said in a quiet voice. "Why aren't you at dinner?" "I was studying, Neville. What's wrong?" He said nothing as she came across the room and sat down beside him, only looked down at the box in his lap again. She followed his gaze, and her heart turned over. "Oh, Neville." Trevor the Toad lay curled in a scattering of sawdust at the bottom of the box. He was not trying to escape. He was not even moving. His eyes were open, and Hermione knew immediately that he was dead. "Oh, Neville, I'm so sorry. When did he die? Where are you going to bury him?" "Bury him?" Neville laughed shortly. "This box just turned up at the floor of my bed when I came back from Care of Magical Creatures. I don't know what happened to him." He looked up at Hermione. "Do you think someone could have killed him?" "Oh, but why would anyone do that? That would just be evil. Maybe somebody found him and was too shy to say anything to you. How long had he been missing?" "Nearly 2 weeks," said Neville, his voice quieter than ever. "Trevor used to be my dad's when he was at school. My grandfather raised him from a tadpole. He was supposed to live 100 years. Hermione reached out and patted Neville's hand. It was thinner than she remembered, but then Neville wasn't the round-faced kid he had been at 11. He had grown into a tall and lanky boy, but the sadness in his eyes reminded her of the child he had once been. "Come on, Neville," she said. "Let's go bury him in the snow out by Hagrid's hut. And if Charlie comes back, maybe he'll let you have some fire whiskey. I think you need it." "You must think I'm stupid, crying over a dead toad," said Neville in a low voice. "You won't tell anyone, will you?" "I don't think you're stupid," she said, "and I won't tell anyone." It took Draco a long time to fall asleep that night. His brief conversation with Hermione played over and over in his head like a news report on the Wizarding Wireless, and again he saw Blaze's hurt expression during Charlie's class, and Ginny sitting with Seamus in the Great Hall. He would have liked to have talked to Harry, but Harry seemed distracted, and there was nobody else he really had an interest in talking to. Life was grim. Even recalling the look of fleeting terror that had crossed Finnegan's face in the library didn't help matters much. He had no sooner drifted into an uneasy slumber than a muffled pounding on the door to his bedroom woke him once again. Struggling to sit up, he brushed the hair away from his eyes before reaching out and tapping the candle on his bed stand to light it. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and winced at the coldness of the stone floor. The pounding came again, louder this time. All right, keep your knickers on," he muttered to himself, and went to open the door. There was no one there. Draco blinked into the emptiness for a moment, startled, before he twigged. "Potter?" There was a slight rustling, and Harry's head appeared, crowned with even messier hair than usual, seeming to float in midair above the floor. Draco remembered the first time he had ever seen Harry pull that stunt with his invisibility cloak, back at the Shrieking Shack. It had nearly scared the living daylights out of him. Now he could take it in stride. "Sorry," said Harry contritely. "I didn't want anyone to see me here." "Yes, not even me, apparently," said Draco, leaning against the door jamb. "How did you get in?" "Easy. The password is Slytherin Pride, isn't it?" said Harry. "Just the sort of password you would think up." "Yes, very clever." "Look, are you going to let me in, or are you just going to swank around in your silk pajamas like a pretentious git?" Draco looked injured. "What do you have against silk?" "Let me in, Malfoy." Draco dropped his arms and Harry stalked past him, tossing his invisibility cloak onto the chest of drawers at the foot of Draco's bed. Underneath it, he was wearing blue cotton pajamas with a hole in the right sleeve. Harry glanced around the room curiously. "It's not so small," he said. "Weird ceiling, though." Draco glanced up. The ceiling of his bedroom was oddly angled, slanting so sharply down towards the far side he had to crouch down to climb into the window seat. Small windows were cut into the wall above his bed, but they had been bricked up on the far side and lent a claustrophobic air to the proceedings. He did, however, have a working fireplace, which had always pleased him. He closed the door behind him and bolted it against intrusion. "Yeah," he said. "I call the architectural style early maniac. It was a working dungeon once, you know." Draco gestured towards the fireplace, and a small fire shimmered to life in the grate. "Anyway, Potter, what are you doing here? Is something wrong?" "I needed to talk to you about our homework," Harry said. Draco stared. "You... what?" "The homework for DADA," Harry elaborated. "The end-of-year project." "And this couldn't have waited until tomorrow?" Harry looked puzzled for a moment, then sheepish. "I guess it is kind of late," he said, looking down at his bare feet, which were coated in hallway dust. "I talked to Sirius the other night, and I had an idea." Draco began to realize there was more here than met the eye. He dragged a chair over to the bed, turned it around backwards, and sat down, resting his arms on the back. "Did you ask him about your parents?" Harry nodded. "Yeah. He told me they're buried at a place called Doom's Hill. Ring any bells?" Draco shook his head. "No, not really." Harry reached into the breast pocket of his pajamas and drew out a folded parchment. Draco recognized it as their homework assignment. Opening it with a flourish, Harry read out, "Pick one specific site from this list. The Forbidden Forest, Rain Kyle, Nocturne Alley, Doom's Hill, Shepton Mallet. You see?" Draco glanced down and then back up. Harry was looking at him expectantly, his green eyes sharp and intent. He felt a faint foreboding stir within him. Whatever all this meant to Harry, it was not just something significant, but something that he was expecting Draco to pick up on immediately. He was very tempted to say something snide, but the thought that this was the most animated, interested, and alive he had seen Harry look in more than a month stayed his tongue. "All right," he said cautiously. "So it's our homework." "I want to go," said Harry. Said Draco. "Wouldn't it be easier to ask Sirius to take you?" "No, he said he wouldn't take me." Draco felt his eyebrows fly up. "Why?" "Because he wants me to wait until after our owls, and I want to go as soon as possible." There was a short silence. Harry sat where he was, looking down at his hands. When he raised his face, his eyes were dark, unreadable green. "All right," Draco shrugged. "We'll figure out a way to get you there." Harry exhaled his held breath. "Okay then." He got to his feet, shoving the parchment back into his pocket. "Sorry I woke you up." "It's fine. Sleep is overrated." Draco got to his feet and stood there awkwardly for a second before bending down, picking up Harry's cloak and holding it out to him. "Don't forget this," he said. "People see you sneaking out of my bedroom at 2 a.m. They might get the wrong idea." Ignoring the comment, Harry took the cloak. "Thanks," he said, turned to go, then paused, and bent down to pick up something from the ground. When he straightened up, Draco saw that he had a rolled parchment in his hand, stamped with a familiar silver seal. "Looks like someone's left a note shoved under your door, Malfoy." "Right, thanks." Draco took the note. "Bye now," he added firmly, and shut the door on Harry, who was now looking at him curiously. Glancing down at the note in his hand, he unrolled it reluctantly and saw that it was as he had expected, a map. In Reason's familiar flowing writing were the words, "Meet me here," at the top, and after that, a complicated series of illustrated pathways showing the route he was meant to take outside the castle. He let his shoulders sag, a rare feeling of total exhaustion and dejection nearly overcoming him. It just never ended. How many secrets could one person keep and not go completely mad? And now he had another one to keep. Harry's secret about going to see his parents. On the other hand, it did mean that Harry trusted him in a way he didn't trust anyone else. If there was one thing the past 8 months had brought him other than pain and confusion, it was friends. He'd never had friends before. Not friends like Harry, Hermione, Ginny, or Sirius. That was worth a lot. It was worth everything. Straightening his shoulders, he went to get his clothes. She lay beside him in the pools of scarlet and gold flung onto the floor by the high stained glass windows. They lay face to face on their sides, his right hand trailing slowly down her cheek to her pajama top, tracing the line of pearl buttons there before beginning to undo them one by one. "Ron," she said softly. He raised his eyes to hers. Even in the darkness, they were very blue. "Yes?" "Do you think about me when we're not in here?" He was halfway through the row of buttons. "I think about you all the time." She sighed. "You pretend so well." He was done with the buttons, and his hand slid over her bare skin, gentle and careful. She remembered how clumsy he had been the first time, but that was before. "So do you," he said, and leaned in to kiss her. His lips brushed hers gently, then slid to the corner of her mouth, her throat, her cheek. She let her head fall back, and then the door of the room opened and she heard someone gasp out loud in surprise. She sprang away from Ron, her hands flying up to cover herself. Malcolm Baddock, the Slytherin chaser, stood in the doorway, one hand on the latch, the other dangling at his side, gazing at them in utter and total astonishment. She tried to hide herself behind Ron, who at least was wearing his boxers, but it was no use. Malcolm had seen them both clearly. He stood frozen in the doorway, staring in shock, mouth open, his dark eyes almost impossibly wide. There was a long silence, and then he said, with surprise but profound admiration, "Damn, Weasley, you go for it. You really go for it." That broke the tableau. Ron scrambled for his clothes, and Malcolm, as if suddenly sensing the seriousness of the situation, began to back towards the door. "Malcolm," said Ron sharply. "I won't tell anyone," Malcolm interrupted quickly, his eyes on the wand next to Ron's hand. "Really, I'll keep it to myself." He turned and bolted then, and Ron leapt to his feet and fumbled with the zipper on his jeans. He swore out loud. "Wait here," he said to her, and raced to the door, buttoning up his shirt as he ran. without putting his shoes on or stopping to pick up his wand. She hesitated for a moment, frozen, before her own shock drove her to her feet, and she paused to seize Ron's wand and his shoes before racing after him, flinging the door closed behind her. Dashing out into the hallway, she saw a flicker of movement off to her left and bolted after it. Around a corner and then another, she ran on instinct. Stairs rose up before her, and she raced up them, spun to her left, and nearly crashed into Ron, who was standing stock still in the middle of a hallway, his hands at his sides.
"Ron!" she gasped, almost in tears. "Where is he? Where's Malcolm?"
"Right there," said Ron, in a strained sort of voice, and pointed. She looked where he indicated, and the wand and shoes slid out of her grasp and hit the floor.
What happened to him?"
"I don't know," said Ron, in the same strained voice, looking down at where Malcolm lay, sprawled face up across the hallway floor, his arms flung out, his eyes blank, and his body rigid. I just came around the corner and he was here, like this.
Did you do anything to him?"
"No," said Ron sharply, turning to face her. "I didn't even have my wand. What could I have done?"
"I know, I'm sorry. What should we do? Should we get a teacher?"
"And get caught together?" he demanded, then paused. "But we can't just leave him. You go. Go back quickly. Take care no one sees you."
"What will you say when they come?"
"I'll say I came across him while I don't know. I'll think of something, okay?" She looked at him in distracted panic, unable to move, and he touched her face gently, with so much loving concern it almost made her start to cry. "Go," he said again, and she went. The map led Draco up a flight of stairs and along a wide stone pathway he had never noticed before, running along the castle's edge, to an outside balcony. As he walked along the battlements, the clear night air broke over his exposed skin like splashes of cold water. All around beneath him, the icy world stretched away towards the forest, an unbroken and unmoving sea of milky glass. The fragile winter moon showed its lace-like edges against a sky of black velvet, illuminating the hexagonal paving stones beneath his feet. Exhilarated by the night and by the coldness of the air, Draco began to forget that he had not wanted to come out tonight. As he continued, the battlement dead-ended at a circular top of a tower, fringed with a collar of crenellated stone. Rhys was there, as he had expected her to be, all black hair and eyes and cloak billowing in the wind, against a background of moonlit sky. Under the cloak, she wore another velvet dress, this one gold and indigo and scarlet. Matching gems sparkled on her fingers, champagne and ink and blood.
"You're late," she said as he approached. "I almost didn't wait for you."
"Don't you ever worry about freezing to death?" he demanded, by way of an answer. "Why can't you just meet me inside?" Rhys just smirked.
"The fresh air is good for you.
"And anyway," she said, waving her jeweled hand, "I'm not welcome inside these walls." "Why not?"
"It's a long story, and part of it concerns things I would rather not talk about."
Her eyes shut down, and he knew he would get no more from her on that subject.
"I have a letter for you, Draco."
"Now there's a shocker. And I thought you invited me out here to give me my Christmas present." Rhys smirked once more, severely, and reached into a fold of her cloak and drew out a rolled scrap of parchment and handed it to him.
"Read this tonight."
Draco reached out and took the parchment from her hands. It was cold against his fingers. He wanted to unroll it and read it, but not in front of Rhys. Her cool curiosity unnerved him. He took a deep breath. The icy air seared into his lungs. What do you know, Risen?
I don't know what you mean.
You know something you're not telling me. She ran a cat-like finger through a loose curl of her hair.
I know a lot of things.
I bet you do, but only some of them are relevant to me. Why does my father send you? Does he tell you what to say, what to do? Is it just to catch me off guard? I'm not stupid, I know that. But why?
And why should I answer you?
She said, and the tone of her voice had changed.
You cannot even begin to comprehend what I am.
What are you, then? A vampire? He demanded.
Nothing so crude,
said Risen, looking superior, and turned away with a dismissive gesture. And then, to his own surprise, he found he had reached out and caught her by the wrist and spun her towards him angrily. So, are you immortal, or just very long-lived? Are you the best he can do? He snarled. It seems to me like the forces of darkness aren't even trying.
Let me go,
she said coldly. Answer me first, he replied.
Let me go, or I will make you sorry,
she said in a sharp, hard voice, her eyes black splinters in the still white. The fine hairs rose up along the back of his neck, as if someone had walked over his grave. He let her go, and she moved away from him, her black cloak falling open. It was lined with colorful cloth woven in eye-dizzying patterns. My father, he began. Your father is Voldemort's lapdog, she said, her voice flawed with crystalline disgust. I didn't realize you were on our side, said Draco snidely.
On your side?
Her voice was freezing, but then looked away from him, her black hair blowing across her face.
If you really wanted to know what I am, I could show you.
She began slowly and took a step back, and as she moved away, her cloak flew to the side, and he saw the carvings etched into the battlements behind her. It was familiar, as if he had seen them before, and then he realized that he had. In the vision during the prefect's meeting, he had seen himself standing against battlements, and behind him a wall of stone etched with carvings, burned silver by moonlight. He spun around, the sensation that he was being watched right now, at this very moment, suddenly overpowering. Casting his gaze over the battlements where they stood, and then up and beyond, he saw something dark and hunched, huddled against the side of the tower that rose above them. The terror he had felt in the vision rose up again, even stronger, and then something bright and silvery flashed out against the darkness of the huddled figure, and Draco turned and shoved Risen out of the way. She shrieked out loud and fell, and then he heard a sharp whistling noise by his ear, and knew what it was, a sound so familiar to him from hunting, although he couldn't imagine what it was doing here, at Hogwarts. Something struck his shoulder, once, and a lancing pain like white fire engulfed him. He saw the moon tilt away, the world falling open like an unfurling flower. Somewhere very far away, he could still hear Risen screaming. And then the darkness closed in, and there was no pain at all. Having not slept well, Ginny was late to breakfast. As a result, she found everyone already in the throes of discussing the fact that the night before, fifth-year Malcolm Baddock had been discovered frozen in a state of magical stasis by none other than Ron himself on his way to the prefect's bathroom. The rumor was that it had been a prank or a duel gone wrong. The Slytherins looked dour and annoyed, all except Draco, who wasn't at breakfast yet. A few first-years looked nervous, and so did a number of other students who remembered the basilisk attacks of years ago. I was in magical stasis, Colin Creevey was announcing cheerfully to anyone who would listen.
It wasn't so bad."
Neville looked apprehensive. "Do you think it was another basilisk?" "No," said Ron, who was looking drained and irritable. There were shadows under his eyes, and the good-humoured air that had hung around him lately was gone. There was no water around him, or anything reflective. If it had been another basilisk, he would be dead, like Moaning Myrtle. "I'm pretty sure Moaning Myrtle spies on me in the bath," said Justin Walton, a 6th-year prefect. "Nonsense," said Ron flatly. Ginny was glad for the change of subject from basilisks and magical stasises. Her first year at Hogwarts was not something she liked to dwell on. She tried to focus her attention instead on what Harry and Hermione were talking about, but that turned out not to be a good idea either.
"Harry," Hermione was saying, her voice low but intent, "I have to talk to you."
"Not right now," said Harry, reaching for the pumpkin juice and pouring some into his glass.
Hermione flushed. "It's important."
"Tomorrow," said Harry, and put the jug down with an exasperated thump, "when I don't have to set up my homework assignment with Lupin."
"Always have something,"
Hermione began. "Not now," said Harry with sharp finality. For a moment, Hermione sat very still, and Ginny wondered if perhaps she might cry. To her knowledge, Harry had never been one to avoid talking to Hermione. When they had been friends, he had looked at her with fond exasperation. When she became his girlfriend, he had looked at her as if she were a minor but unbelievable miracle. Now he wouldn't look at her at all. Hermione slowly raised her head. Even more slowly she got to her feet, her glass of pumpkin juice in her hand, and then, without the slightest warning, she flung the glass hard at the table. It shattered with a sound like a bomb dropping, spraying pumpkin juice and glass in all directions. Harry jerked back, stunned, as the whole table fell silent and stared. "Harry James Potter!" Hermione shouted at the top of her lungs. "You are going to talk to me right now!" Shocked out of his torpor, Harry stared in astonishment. Beside him, Ron sat stunned, dripping pumpkin juice and wisely remaining silent. Hermione herself stood where she was, hands on her hips, her cheeks flushed scarlet and her eyes unbelievably bright. "Hermione." Harry turned in his seat, his hand held out to her, his expression surprised and wondering, but without any of the closed-off coldness they had all grown used to. "Hermione, can we just—" The great hall doors banged open, and everyone turned to look as a student raced into the hall. A girl, looking no more than 14, wearing the banded gold and black scarf of Hufflepuff. Her robes were soaking wet, as was her hair, and she was in tears. A low murmur of curious surprise ran round the room. Ginny whipped around to stare, a sharp feeling of foreboding gripping her stomach, as the girl raced distractedly past the students towards the high table. Charlie was already on his feet, running down the steps, and as he neared the girl, he caught hold of her, steadying her. Ginny saw that the red she had noted on the girl's scarf was blood. The other teachers were getting to their feet now. The girl, talking through her tears, gesturing wildly with her hands and pointing. As the whole school fell silent and leaned forward, trying to hear her, the girl's voice rose up sharp and clear, tinged with hysteria. "In the snow," she was gasping, tripping breathlessly over her words. "By the North Tower, there was blood everywhere. I think he might be dead. You have to come. Madame Pomfrey, too." Even at this distance, Ginny could see the look of shock on Charlie's face. When he spoke, his voice was strained. "You're quite certain it's Draco Malfoy?" The girl nodded, her expression terrified. "Yes," she said, "it was him." She burst into a fresh spat of tears. "I've never seen anyone dead before," she wept, but Ginny had stopped hearing her. The world had gone a sickening sort of grey color, and she grabbed for the table to steady herself. She heard a loud slamming sound off to her left and looked up. It was Harry, who had shoved his chair back with such force that it had tipped over and hit the flagstone floor. Hermione looked at him in horror. He was very white, his hand at the upper basilical charm around his throat. "Harry," Hermione whispered. But Harry had turned, bolted for the Great Hall doors, and raced through. Hermione, having gone an ashen gray color, looked wildly around the table at the silent, stunned Gryffindors, hesitated, then fled after Harry. Quotes. "A turtle with heavy shopping" is from Blackadder. "Fate is what you call it when you don't know the name of the person screwing you over" is from Malcolm in the Middle. "I think it just goes to show what sort of life we lead that we can even consider using apocalypse in the plural" is from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. "Beat you to death with a shovel" and "a vague disclaimer is nobody's friend" are both from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. "Are you happy to see me, or is that a longboat in your pocket?" is from Blackadder. And that is all for this chapter, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, all that good news. If you're new here, welcome. And if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, I do have a Patreon where you can read my own personal writings, as well as the spicy art that I have for higher tiers. But if you are not interested in that, I do have a Ko-fi. Both are linked in my About page here on YouTube. And just to let everyone know, I am also releasing PDFs for free over on my Patreon and my Ko-fi and over on one of my Tumblrs. These are Sailor Moon PDFs that have a lot of fan fiction, some fan art, stuff that I have compiled from a lot of the websites that were very active in the late 90s, early thousands. So if any of you guys are interested in that, especially if you're Sailor Moon fans, that's where you can find them. I am taking them year by year. It is a long-going project, my life's work, you might say. But anyway, guys, again, thank you so much, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.